at the place where the map ends, amid deep forests and cold, barren meadows. There are stories that no one dares to speak of. Do you think the tranquility of the countryside will protect you from the terrifying things? Think again. In today's video, we will explore 3 horrifying rural tales from America, real experiences that left the people involved never sleeping soundly again. The Whistler in the Night. The familiar whistle, repeated over and over. And then one night, it no longer came from outside. 2 strangers and the heather field. A harmless walk for 2 children leads to a breathless escape from a dark abyss. The man in the dark. He stood there, night after night, staring through the window and calling out each child's name. If you love creepy, mysterious stories like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Each subscription from you is a great motivation for me to continue bringing you the scariest and most haunting true stories. I truly appreciate you being here in a world of strange noises, darkness, and things that cannot be explained. Lock the door, turn on the light, and let's begin. Evan Foster was not the superstitious type. He was a practical man. He worked in construction, drank more beer than he ate meals, and thought that divorce was just a long vacation for the soul. But on the day he moved into his grandfather's old cabin on the outskirts of Cheatham, Alabama, the sky was overcast, as if the sun didn't want to witness what was about to happen. The house stood alone on 10 acres of land consumed by the forest. No neighbors, no gas station nearby, just the wind, a wind that whistled like a cry, and old oak trees growing crooked as if they were trying to escape the earth. The house was the kind you see in old movies. The wood was peeling, the floorboards creaked under every step. There was always a sense that something was silently watching from the darkness behind the door, not present, but always waiting. Evan chose his grandfather's old bedroom. The walls still held faded wedding photos, and the old wool blanket still smelled faintly of camphor. He drank beer every evening on the porch, feeling as if life was giving him a second chance. No car horns, no social media, only the sound of owls and the scent of rotting wood. By the 7th night, everything changed. It was around 1 a.m. when Evan had just lain down in bed when he heard it, the whistle. Distant, slow, off-pitch, and purposeful. Not a specific tune, but more like a distorted sigh turned into a rhythm. It wasn't melodic, nor cheerful. It was wrong, as if something in the mind of the whistler had shattered a long time ago. He sat up quickly, listening. The whistle sounded again, clearer, closer, from the forest. Evan went out onto the porch and turned on the light. No one. Nothing but trees and darkness, thick, dense, as if something was hiding in it. He stood there motionless for a long time, then slowly backed away, shut the door, and locked it securely. And that night, he didn't sleep, because he realized something. That whistle was not unfamiliar. It was the same as one he had heard long ago, when he was a child, on a night with a power outage, in this very house, when his grandfather told him, "If you hear a whistle at midnight, never respond." Since the first night he heard the whistle, Evan no longer saw the house as peaceful. The quiet now felt like a trap, and he was the one stuck in the middle of it. On the 8th night, the whistle returned. This time, the clock read 1:17 a.m. Exactly. Evan stared at the digital clock on the table as if he were hypnotized. The melody, if it could even be called that, was the same. Off-pitch, slow, cracked. This time, it didn't come from deep within the forest, but from near the wooden fence behind the yard. For the first time, Evan felt something stir in his chest. Not exactly fear, but a kind of awareness, as if his soul was speaking, saying, "Something is coming closer." He turned on the light, stepped out onto the porch, flashlight in one hand and a box cutter in the other, mixed with panic and unexplained anger. But just like the night before, no one was there. No footprints, no broken branches, just the whistle, fading away slowly, retreating into the darkness. On the 9th night, it sounded again, at exactly 1:17. On the 10th night, it appeared near the eaves. Evan heard it from the window of the bedroom, echoing down as if someone were standing just below, whistling to the sky. At that point, he couldn't stand it anymore. He called the police. A senior officer named H was dispatched. The man was tall and thin, with sun-darkened skin and a far-off look in his eyes, as if he had heard more than he wanted to tell. Evan briefly explained everything. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Your grandfather used to call us about that. Every spring, he'd say someone would whistle around the house at night. At that hour, we never found anything. I thought he was starting to lose his mind. But now you hear it? So..." He paused, his eyes turning towards the forest, his voice dropping. "I think there is something here." After that, Evan began locking all the windows, wedging chairs under the door handles. He no longer drank beer on the porch, no longer opened the curtains. Every night, he sat motionless in the dark, his grandfather's hunting rifle in his lap, heavy and cold like a memory. On the 11th night, the whistle echoed from just behind the bathroom wall. Evan didn't turn on the light. He just sat there, gripping the rifle, listening to the whistle, like someone was walking down the hallway step by step, whistling that distorted melody. Every time the whistle stopped, his heart seemed to stop as well. It was no longer outside the house. It was inside. Evan no longer remembered the last time he had slept. Every night, he sat motionless like a statue, eyes wide open, the gun resting across his lap, the hallway light on all night. That light, yellowish, flickering, was the only thing separating him from the darkness, knocking on the door every hour. On the 13th night, there was no more whistling. At 1:17 a.m., he heard it, knocking, 3 knocks, slow, heavy, as if someone was using their knuckles to knock on the back door of the kitchen. Evan didn't move. He just breathed, slowly, as if any movement could awaken whatever was waiting. A minute later, the floorboards creaked down the hallway. Then, another step, and another. The hallway light flickered, as if the darkness was slowly consuming the light. Evan stood up, stepped out of the bedroom, gun gripped tightly in his hands, and then he saw it. At the end of the hallway, in the faint light, a figure stood there, dressed in black, no hat. The face was pale with no eyebrows, no expression, just dark, hollow eyes. Not hollow because of the lack of light, but hollow, as if behind them there was nothing. No soul, no consciousness, only emptiness. It didn't move. Evan raised the gun, both hands trembling. He tried to shout, "Who's there?" But his throat was dry and burning. There was no answer, but it started to move, slowly, step by step, no sound. "Don't come any closer," Evan growled, but his feet felt like they were nailed to the floor. His finger squeezed the trigger, but the gun didn't fire, partly out of fear, partly because he wasn't sure if it was a person. When the dark figure was only a few steps away, Evan screamed, "I have a gun! I'll shoot!" It stopped. Then it turned, not running, not panicking, just turning away as if it had seen enough. The footsteps grew heavier as it walked away, out the front door, and disappeared into the forest. Evan dashed onto the porch, pulled the trigger, and the bullet whizzed through the night, tearing through the fog. The echo reverberated through the trees, but the forest did not respond. When the police arrived the next morning, the front door was wide open. No signs of a break-in, no footprints. But there was one thing that froze Evan's blood. None of the locks had been broken. Everything was intact. That person had a key, the deputy said softly, eyes never leaving Evan's face. Someone has been entering this house for a long time. Evan left the house that very day. He didn't clean up, didn't lock the door, only took the gun, a few old journals from his grandfather, and the deep fear that had embedded itself into his bones. He drove all night, not stopping until the lights of a strange town lit up the windshield like a salvation light. His father later returned to the house, changed the locks, sealed everything, and listed it for sale through a small local real estate agency. Evan never returned, and his father never asked any more questions about the 117 nights. But one thing always bothered Evan. The person, or thing, had had a key all along. Had it been a stranger, a sick neighbor, or someone who had once lived in that very house before even his grandfather? There was no proof, no face, only the whistle, a sound that now lingered in Evan's mind every time night fell. He moved to the city, a place with people, with streetlights, with noisy neighbors. But sometimes, when standing in the middle of a crowd or lying in his 3-story apartment, Evan would suddenly snap awake when the clock hit 1:17, not because he heard anything, but because he didn't hear anything at all. The absolute silence. Silence. The kind of silence he had once known, now scared him more than any sound. And every year in the spring, when the wind began to change direction and the trees began to whisper, he would dream of that hallway, the flickering light, and the figure dressed in black was standing at the end of the hallway, saying nothing, not whistling, just standing there, waiting. There are places that maps will never touch, not because they're too far, but because no one wants to remember them. The village where a boy named Alex once lived was one of those places. A faint dot on the rural landscape, hidden between forests and meadows, with a population of barely 100 people. There, every child knew the license plate of each family, and every adult had a nickname. Uncle Wood, Aunt Corn, Old Mr. Old Parrot. For Alex, the memories of that village were the smell of damp grass after rain, the glass bottle peeking out from under the wooden fence, and the sound of the bell from the old lady's house nearby. The tinkling that signaled it was time to go home, though the clock never needed to wake him up. That summer was scorching hot, the ground burning beneath every step. Alex and his best friend, Julian, dragged their feet through the alleys, their throats parched from craving a can of Coke. But the coins in their pockets were just enough not to even buy the cap. Then, the call came from the house by the road, Mrs. Lydia's house. An old woman so frail that her white hair always flew in the wind like mist. "Children, come here for a moment," she said, her voice as soft as the wind blowing through a crack in the door. She said she was preparing a small birthday party and wanted to make mint tea, but she had run out of leaves. If they would help pick 2 bags full of mint leaves from the forest behind the village, she would buy them as many sodas as they wanted. Neither of them hesitated. Tea and soda, ice cold, in the middle of summer? Too good to pass up. Neither of them asked, Why didn't she go herself? Neither of them wondered, why had no one ever seen mint growing behind the village after so many years of living there? Because children are not afraid of things they don't understand, until that thing looked back at them. The sun began to dip when Alex and Julian walked deeper into the path behind the village, where the edge of the forest began to swallow every sound. The crumpled plastic bags hung loosely in their hands, the two boys breathing hard from the heat and dust. The ground was dry, the trees withered, and there wasn't a single sprig of mint. Julian kicked a stone, grumbling, "There's nothing here, just dead grass." Alex was also irritated. The thirst made him feel like his throat was full of sand. Just then, two figures appeared. Suddenly, as if they had sprouted from the ground. They were tall, very tall, or at least that's how they appeared to the two boys. Dressed in all black, with his hoods covering their heads, an odd sight in the 38-degree heat. They blocked the path, not saying a word for a few seconds, just staring, as if counting each breath. Then one of them spoke, in a soft voice, too soft to be a man's voice, but not quite a woman's. "Hello, children. Where are you off to in such a hurry?" Julian squeezed Alex's hand, pulling gently, a silent signal that Alex didn't understand. He just smiled naively. We're looking for mint. Mrs. Lydia asked us to pick it for her." The stranger tilted their head slightly. "Oh, mint? What a coincidence. We know where there's a whole field of it." Then they pointed towards the hills, where any child who had grown up in the village would know well. There was nothing there but corn and abandoned land. Alex, still naive, was about to follow, but Julian held him back. Julian's eyes never left the hand of the person who had just bent down to pat Alex on the head. The pat was not light, not gentle, but as though measuring him. "What are your parents' names?" the other one asked, their voice still calm but devoid of any warmth. Julian didn't answer right away. His gaze moved from the stranger's face to Alex's face, then to the edge of the forest. He knew. With the intuition of a child born here, Julian knew these two people didn't belong to the village. "I don't know," Julian lied. "I just moved here." At that moment, the stranger's expression changed. They no longer smiled, no more questioning. They simply said, "Well then, come with us. The mint is waiting." Alex began to feel a chill, even though sweat was pouring down his back. For the first time, he heard the beat of his own heart in his ears, and realized they were too far from home. Alex's feet began to move instinctively, but Julian's hand gripped him tightly, like a vice. Both of them followed the strangers, the sound of dry leaves crunching underfoot like a warning. The deeper they went, the thicker the forest became, and the sunlight was gradually choked out beneath the shadowy canopy. There was no scent of mint, only the smell of rotting earth and something foul simmering, like decaying flesh buried too shallow. Alex swallowed hard, anxiety rising in waves within him, like the crashing waves against the shore of his memories. He had never been this far from the village before. Behind them, everything was familiar: Mrs. Lydia's house, the stone road, the old church bell ringing. Ahead was the forest, and two people whose names they didn't know. "We used to live here," one stranger spoke, as if reading Alex's mind. "Back in the day, this place was full of mint. It smelled so good, especially when the weather is this hot." Alex nodded, forcing a smile. But Julian didn't respond, didn't nod. He silently brought his mouth close to Alex's ear and whispered, in a voice softer than the sound of falling leaves, "There's something wrong. Get ready to run." Alex turned to look at his friend. For the first time, he saw Julian afraid. Not the childish kind of fear, but the kind of fear that comes from someone who knows exactly what's waiting at the end of the road. Just then, the strangers stopped. One of them turned around, their eyes no longer smiling. "We're here." Ahead was a narrow path leading down to a valley. No mint, just an open pit, deep and dark. And for a moment, Alex thought he saw something move beneath it. "Go down. We'll help you fill the bags faster." Julian squeezed Alex's hand so hard it hurt. "Now," Julian growled. And they both turned and ran. The sound of crushed leaves, the heavy breathing, the curses behind them, and the pounding footsteps on the earth, like wolves chasing their prey. Alex almost slipped as he ran down the hill. Julian didn't let go of his hand. Not for a second. His feet bled from sharp stones, but he kept running, as if what was behind them wasn't just people, but something older, something more dangerous. When the village appeared through the evening light, the two boys crashed into the wooden gate of Mrs. Lydia's house, falling on the hot ground. No one was behind them, but the eyes. Alex knew those eyes were still watching from the edge of the forest, waiting for the next opportunity. Alex and Julian sat, gasping for breath in Mrs. Lydia's yard, sweat mixing with tears, their faces as pale as if their blood had been drained. Mrs. Lydia opened the door, panic rising as she saw the two children huddled, as if they had just escaped the jaws of a wild beast. Julian was the one who spoke, his voice trembling but concise, with no unnecessary details. Alex couldn't say anything, his mouth locked in shock. After hearing everything, Mrs. Lydia remained silent for a long time, her gaze drifting to the distant forest, where the fading light of dusk was slowly dying. "There are some people who never leave the forest," she said softly, "whether they are bodies or just souls." After that, Julian was forbidden from leaving the house for a month. As for Alex, he couldn't sleep for weeks. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the two figures standing at the edge of the pit, reaching out to him. No one in the village knew who they were. No one had ever seen them before. And what sent shivers down Alex's spine the most was when he remembered one of the strangers' voices. "We used to live here, but here." There had never been anyone like that. Years passed, and Alex moved to the city, trying to forget that summer. But some memories don't fade. They just sleep for a while. And sometimes, amidst the bustling streets, Alex would glimpse a man with a hood standing across the road, staring at him, not saying anything, not coming closer, just waiting, as if the mint hunt from that year was still not over. The wooden house in the Texas meadow looked as peaceful as a postcard. A house with a small porch, a chicken coop in the backyard, and a row of trees in the distance casting shadows against the sunset sky. For Cam and his 8-year-old sister Katie, it was the dream summer getaway. No school, no homework, just their grandparents, their dog Cora, and all day running through the meadows. Their parents were busy, so every summer they sent the two siblings to stay with their grandparents in the countryside, where the phone signal was so weak that you had to ride your bike, stand at the top of a hill just to send a message. The first night, Cam and Katie slept in the downstairs bedroom, with a window right above their bed. Outside, the meadow was quiet. Only the sounds of crickets and the wind rustling through the old corn stalks. At 2 a.m., Katie woke up suddenly. She didn't know why, only that her eyes snapped open as if something had pulled her out of sleep. The sound of footsteps, very faint, very heavy. Katie held her breath. The footsteps were slow, as if someone was walking around the house. She glanced over at Cam. He was still sound asleep, the blanket draped loosely over his waist. Then Katie heard breathing, clearly, deep and heavy, like an adult's, from outside the window. She slowly turned her head, looking towards the curtain. A figure, tall, standing still, as if pressing its face against the glass. Katie didn't dare scream. She pulled the blanket over her head, her heart racing, forcing herself to believe it was just a dream. But the breathing was still there, slow and steady. Then, it stopped. The next morning, she didn't tell anyone, afraid of being called imaginative. But that evening, as the family sat at dinner, Cora suddenly barked loudly, growled, and ran toward the back door. And in that instant, Katie saw the figure again, standing at the edge of the forest, staring directly at her. After dinner, Katie kept glancing towards the forest, but the figure had vanished, as if it had never existed. Cora probably saw a fox, her grandfather said, rubbing the dog's head, trying to downplay the situation. But Katie could see clearly. Cora's eyes were still fixed on the outside, his fur standing on end, growling, not the playful bark of a countryside dog familiar with the forest creatures. That night, Katie couldn't sleep again. She lay under the blanket, eyes fixed on the window, even though the curtain was closed tightly. The room was dark, with only the faint glow of the hallway light peeking through the crack in the door. Cam was in the room upstairs, lightly snoring, unaware. 1 a.m. The footsteps again. This time, Katie didn't hesitate. She softly called, "Cam." No response. The footsteps drew closer to the window. Katie saw the figure, tall, motionless, still in that same position, standing straight, face almost touching the glass. She sat up suddenly, her heart nearly bursting. This time she ran out into the hallway, banging on her grandparents' door, her voice trembling. "There's someone outside the window." Her grandfather immediately sprang up, grabbing the old flashlight. He went out to the backyard, sweeping the light over every patch of grass. No one. No footprints. Only the chicken coop gate was wide open. Even though Katie clearly remembered her grandfather locking it with the iron latch after feeding the chickens. He tightened his grip on the flashlight, saying nothing. The next morning, he put up a new wooden fence behind the house, and her grandmother made sure to close all the windows early. Katie asked, but no one answered directly. Once, her grandmother muttered, "Probably just wandering." Probably. But the way she looked out at the forest, quickly, nervously, made Katie know her grandmother didn't believe what she had said. The next night, Katie was woken again. This time, it wasn't footsteps. It was whistling. No melody, no emotion. Just 3 even notes, cold and clear, coming from outside the window. Katie crawled out of bed, trembling as she approached the window. She lifted a corner of the curtain, and her heart stopped. The man wasn't outside anymore. He was bending low, pressing his cheek against the glass, his eyes staring intently inside as if he knew exactly that Katie was looking back. His mouth curled up, not smiling, but testing his lips. And then he whistled again. Katie ran out of the room as if the floor were on fire. Her bare feet slammed against the cold wooden floor, her heavy breathing echoing in the hallway. She banged on her grandparents' door, this time without saying anything, just pointing towards the window, tears streaming down her face. Her grandfather immediately grabbed the rifle. No flashlight, only the gaze of a man who had seen this before. Cam woke up when he heard the heavy footsteps. When the family gathered outside, the flashlight swept through the bushes. Katie pointed toward the forest. There. He's standing right there. I saw his eyes. I swear. Her grandfather said nothing. He just raised the rifle, aiming it straight into the darkness. A gunshot rang out, like thunder, splitting the still air. No screams, no fallen objects, only the sound of whistling, echoing from deep within the forest. 3 notes, decisive, calm. His hands shook. Her grandmother grabbed Katie's hand, pulling her into the house. "Close all the doors," she yelled. "Back door, windows, the basement." Katie had never seen her grandparents like this, as if they were fighting something shapeless but full of memories. That night they all slept in the living room. The lights were on. The door was locked. Her grandfather stood guard, the rifle in his hands, his eyes never leaving the door. 1:23 a.m. knocking. 3 knocks. From the back door. Katie held her breath. Cam squeezed her hand. The footsteps, very light, as if someone was walking inside. "It can't be," her grandfather whispered. "I locked everything." A faint, screech-like sound, like cracked wood, came from the shed out back. Then, a voice. "Katie, come here." A man's voice, clear, calm, but not a voice of someone familiar. Katie froze. No, it's not Grandpa, right?" Her grandmother held her tightly. "No," she whispered. "He's back." Katie trembled, asking, "Back? How?" Her grandfather turned to look at her, his eyes gleaming with something deeper than fear. Many years ago, there was a man who worked on a farm nearby. He was kicked out for looking at the children the wrong way. Then he disappeared. No one ever found him again. Her grandmother continued, her voice choking. But every summer, when a child comes to stay, he returns. From the forest. Katie swallowed hard. He's a person, or... The question hung heavily in the air. And then, as if in response, another voice sounded, this time right by the window. "No need to ask. I'm here." The door didn't open. No further noise. Only silence. Thick, so thick that Katie could hear every beat of her own heart. Her grandfather sat motionless with the rifle in his hands, his eyes never leaving the window. Her grandmother held Katie and Cam close, as if just letting go would let the children be pulled away. The whistling didn't sound again. There was no more voice. But the gaze, the feeling of being watched, still clung to the entire house like a cold fog. The next morning, when the sunlight flooded the porch, they stepped outside. No footprints, no sign of forced entry. Only one thing, hanging from the back door handle, an old black wool hat. No one recognized it, but her grandmother whispered, "It's his." The last day he worked here, he left his hat in the shed. That day, her grandparents called Katie's father, asking him to bring the children home earlier than planned. Katie didn't object. She just wanted to leave that place, leave the windows, leave the forest. Later, when she grew up, Katie still clearly remembered that night. She tried searching online, asking older relatives, but no one mentioned that man anymore. No one knew who he was. No one knew where he went. But there was one thing Katie was always certain of. That man never left. And perhaps every summer, when other children came to visit their grandparents in the countryside, he would rise, dust off his shoulders, and wait until 1 a.m. whistling, calling names, and waiting to see who would be the first to open the door. 3 stories, 3 rural areas, 3 warnings in the night. You might have once fallen asleep to the sound of insects chirping, thinking that the countryside is the safest place to escape the world. But sometimes, that's exactly where the darkness knows your name the best. If you feel a chill or can't stop thinking about the whistle at 1:17 a.m., then make sure to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss the next horror story based on true experiences that I'll share. Leave a like if this video made you look over your shoulder before turning off your bedside lamp. And don't forget to comment below. What scared you the most in today's 3 stories? I read every comment, and some of your stories might even become the subject of the next video. Once again, thank you for staying until the end of the video. Wishing you a peaceful night. If you are truly alone.